Alhamdulillah, ya Rabbil Alameen. Let us let people come in. Joining. Mit. All right, people are coming in. All righty, here we are, everybody, in our 18th session of the Wisdom of the Throne. This is going to be a somewhat long reading today. So let's just get cracking. But before I do, I just want to make a quick announcement that I am putting out a self-publication sometime early in the week, a refutation of this TikTok Mahdi that has become quite a online sensation. This is a refutation at a radia. I've written it in both Arabic and English, a very traditional style. I kind of emulated the style of Sopa Azal in one of his books called the Kitab al-Mustaqiz, the book of the sleeper awakened. And it's about a 100-page refutation. I basically take the rug from right and out of this pretender's feet. Anyway, without further ado, let us look at this today, the Wisdom of the Throne, because there's some very, very good stuff in here. It is a little bit long, so I think we will probably go for the full 1 hour and 45 minutes for this session today. Let me let Shane in. Let him come in. All right, he is here. Let me have a quick sip. Wet my palate as we start this long read. All right. Right, number 4 of the second mashriq. Principle refuting the doubts of those who deny the return and reject the resurrection of the body. These doubts include the following objections. The first of these is to search for location and direction for paradise and hell, as though the other world were in some direction or some place in this world. That supposition would necessitate either an interpenetration with bodies in this world or a vacuum somewhere in the cosmos. Such a view is completely unfounded, as we indicated. This basically now begins to touch on some of the conversation we had last week, in particular, one back and forth that Hussein and I had. This is because the other world is a complete world in itself. In any case, the question as to where the totality of this world is located is meaningless, since there is nothing above its top and nothing below its bottom. Indeed, the totality of the universe has no top or bottom, so one can only search for the relative place of parts of a single world, not for the location of its totality. And we have already said that the other world is a complete world. In fact, both paradise and hell are complete and independent worlds. Indeed, every man among the blessed is a complete world, as we have pointed out below. How could this not be? For if this world and the other world were not two complete and differentiated worlds, then God, may he be exalted, would not be the Lord of the worlds. Moreover, the other world is an enduring modality of being, in which there is no death and nothing ever perishes or passes away. It is an abode of proximity to God, in which man speaks with God and in which faces are shining, gazing at their Lord. But this world is perishing and passing away, banished from the region of holiness. It is reported in a prophetic tradition that this world is accursed. Accursed and plague-stricken are all things in it. The difference of consequent attributes between this world and the next is a sign of the determinative differences in their essential modalities of being. God, may he be exalted, said, "We shall bring you forth again in a state you do not know." And it is reported by the Prophet, by the famous traditionist Ibn Abbas, may God have mercy on him, that there is nothing in this world of what there is in paradise except for the names. For the mode of being of the other world is quite other than the mode of being in this world, as you have learned. This world and the other world are different in the very substance of their being. If the other world were of the same substance as this world, then it would not be possible for this world to ever be destroyed and to pass away. This is in relation to the creation of each moment that he's talking about. And if talk of the other world referred to reincarnation of bodies of this world, then the return would merely be an expression for the reconstruction of bodies in this world after its ruin. But the consensus of all religious communities is agreed that this world will pass away and disappear, and that afterwards it will never again be rebuilt. B. The second of these is to believe that the return, if it were true, would necessarily entail reincarnation in earthly bodies. Ordinarily, it is said by literalist theologians that this kind of reincarnation is of the sort permitted by the religious law and what is called the resurrection, or qiyamah. But these people do not really consider that the nature of what is impossible by essence is such that it can never become possible simply through the permission of the religious lawgiver or by changing its name. For the impossibility of reincarnation in the literal sense is something that has been demonstratively proven. A certain famous scholar, which is talking about Fakhreddin Razi, in a treatise concerning the return, responded to this difficulty as follows. He says, the rational soul has two kinds of connection with this body. The first of these, and the primary one, is its connection with the animating spirit that flows through the arteries. The other secondary connection resides in the denser organs. Thus, when the balanced mixture of the spirit becomes corrupted so that it is about to lose its healthy relation with the soul's secondary relation with the organs becomes more intensified. This gives a sort of individual imprint of the particular soul on the parts of the body. Later, during the resurrection, when the framework of the body is assembled and completed for a second time, and the vaporous spirit is once more in it, the connection of the soul also comes back just as it was the first time. It is this secondary connection of the soul to the material parts of the body that keeps any other soul from arising in this particular mixture of bodily parts. Therefore, what returns is this individual enduring soul because of the tendency of the parts of the body. And Mulla Sadra says, this is an absolutely foolish and ridiculous reply, and it's even more worthless than the first, that is the claim of successive reincarnations, since it includes all sorts of additional mistakes. One of these is that in this matter, the secondary connection of the soul to the body is only an incidental one in the sense that there is really only one connection. The relation of the soul to the animating spirits is essential, while the relation of the bodily organs is only a consequence of this essential relation. Another mistake is that the connection of the soul with the body is not by intention and free choice, such that the soul could transfer its connection from the animating spirit toward the bodily organs when it became aware of the corruption of the balanced mixture of the spirit. In addition, the man who said this failed to understand that when the body becomes corrupted, its organs do not remain in their proper balance and harmony, such that the soul could somehow hold on to its connection with them. For the central basis of the bond between the soul and the body is by means of the direction of unity and harmonious balance, and this proceeds from the most subtle, that is the most vaporous spirit, through the less refined parts, until it ends up at the most dense. Moreover, this man neglected to consider even in the slightest what the objective the soul could possibly attain at the point of death through its connection with the materials of a corrupted bodily mixture and through its natural bodily connection. For it is a philosophic axiom that no natural activity takes place except because of an essential natural end. Another problem with this man's reply is that the bodily spirits and organs, both simple and compound, all have their origin and continuation as parts of a living body in an emanation from the direction of soul, in an order proceeding from the higher to the lower. So if the higher ordering spirit that flows through an organ should be corrupted, then the organ itself would not remain an organ, that is, an integral component of a harmonious living whole. Number 5, moreover, it is not the bodily organs that individuate the being of the soul. Such a view would mean that even the healthy balance of the body has been destroyed. Its composition has fallen apart, and its connection with the soul has been broken off. Nonetheless, the soul that has escaped from that body because of its corruption would return to it a second time at the resurrection because of the renewed conjunction of its scattered parts in the appropriate shape. Furthermore, still assuming that the material parts of the body are responsible for the individuation of the person, what would integrate those parts, which have nothing to integrate but the natural form of the basic elements, or a power of the soul whose source on this supposition lies in its dependent connection to their natural material? And then what would integrate the additional parts taken in through nutrition? In fact, the truth of the matter is what maintains the part of the living individual and integrates the parts acquired from nutrition is only the soul of the materials in the newborn, according to those levels and stages of the soul that are prior to its becoming a perfect, that is, intellective and human soul. So in general, it is the soul that begins to individuate the body and its parts, and the body does not individuate the soul in any of its levels. How absolutely ridiculous then are the words of this man who would make the elementary materials and the crude outer shell of the body, things quite external to the direction of its harmonious unity and balance, into that which naturally succeed in calling the soul into its connection with the body. This man, and those who resemble him among the notables of every age, are totally heedless of the true stages and levels of the soul, of the way in which the body arises from the soul in this world and the other world, and of the difference between these two processes. And he who has truly mastered these premises and has learned the priority of the soul over the body will surely recognize how very far removed this man and those like him are from actually realizing the knowledge of the return. Perhaps this man imagined that the body at death was somehow like a deserted old ruin in which a person had lived for a while and had then gone off and abandoned for some time later. Later, this person happened to return to this old ruin and became so overwhelmed with longing for it because of his recollection of the preceding times and past pleasures there, that he undertook to seclude himself in that ruin forever, closing himself away from all sorts of civilized, populous land and splendid, delightful dwelling places. But he who has drunk from the fountain of wisdom and true philosophy will know just how impossible such foolish fantasies and delusions are in the order of natural things. I love his polemical style. It's awesome. Let me have a sip of this coffee real quick. A third objection is that the resurrection of the body would necessitate the returning of something that had ceased to exist. But you have already learned that this is not necessary in the case of the psychic body. The usual reply to this objection is that the matter specific to this body and its original members remain until reassembled at the resurrection. But this is false, since matter in itself is absolutely indeterminate, while the essential reality of each thing is its concrete individuation through its form, not its matter, as has been indicated. A fourth objection is that if the returning of the resurrected body is not for a purpose, then it is pointless. But that would not befit the all-wise. Yet if this purpose is to achieve something for himself, that would be a defect in his axiomatic perfection and self-sufficiency. So he himself must be considered to be above such a thing. But if the purpose of the resurrection is some good for men, then it must either be for the purpose of giving them pain, which does not befit him, or of causing them pleasure. However, pleasures, and especially those of the senses, only consist in the removal of pains, as has been shown in the books of the philosophers and physicians. So this supposition would require that he must first give man pain at death only in order to bring him, through the resurrection of the body, some pleasure of the senses. But does this really befit the all-wise? It would be like someone who cut off a limb and then applied salves and ointments to the wound in order to feel pleasure. Now, a group of people who have responded to this difficulty by saying that God will not be questioned about what he does. No one, they say, has any right to object to what a king does with his possessions. But the true reply to this problem, in a way that really solves it, is something that has been established in the philosophical discussions concerning final causes. Namely, that every act and motion has an end that is essential to it, and that every action has its intrinsically necessary reward. Hence, according to the prophetic tradition, men are requited according to their intentions as a reward for what they have earned. This group of dogmatic theologians might object that these philosophical principles apply only to this world and not to the next. But the God of this world and the other world is one. He has no partner, and you will never find an alteration in God's way, nor will you ever find in it any change. His special activity is nothing but his mercy, his providential ordering of the intelligible structure of being, and his assuring that all things receive their due. And the rewards and punishments are only the results and the fruits of doing good and bad things. The pleasure and blessings of the other world, through whether they be sensible or purely intellective, are not like the pleasures of this world, which are false and passing things, like a mirage in the desert, which the thirsty man thinks to be water. Instead, the pleasures of the other world are real ones, which reach to the very substance of the soul, as you have learned. There's a great part here. Makes me laugh every time I read it. Fifth, still assuming a resurrection of the elemental earthly body, another objection, if that is that if a particular man should in his entirety become food for another man, then only one of the two would be resurrected. For example, if the eater was an unbeliever and the man eaten was one of the truly faithful, then the resurrection of only one body would necessitate either the punishment of the truly faithful man or the eternal bliss of the unbeliever. Or else the eater would be an unbeliever and punished, and the eaten would be a truly faithful man rewarded with bliss, while both of them were in a single body. This is great. The true reply to this, based on the true reality of the soul's other world, can be known by recollecting what we have set forth above. Some people, like the theologians mentioned in this section, have written the most amazing things concerning this subject. Those like them who, although adults, lack the capacity for inner insight and perception through the lights of true faith, should be forbidden to seek to busy themselves with such things, for this can only distract them from the simple, uncritical acceptance of the giver of the religious law and contentment with the religion of old women, a state that does indeed contain a kind of salvation. The example in his polemic afterwards is so good. A sixth objection is that the body of the truth is of limited extent, measurable in miles or parsangs, while the number of souls is unlimited. So the earth's body would not suffice to contain an infinite number of resurrected bodies. The answer to this objection is what you have already learned from the fundamental premises above, that is, that the bodies of the other world are forms created by the soul in its own modality of being. Others have responded to this objector after granting what you mentioned by saying that prime matter is simply a receptive power without any extension in its essence and is therefore capable of an infinite number of divisions and extensions, at least if these occur in temporal succession. And this may be possible, they argued, because time in the other world is not like the time in this world. Since a single day is like 50,000 years according to the days of this world. But this world is not resurrected in that grossly corporeal fashion at all. For the only thing that is actually resurrected is the form of this world. When the earth is stretched out, when it is emptied and what it contains is cast forth, when it pays heed to its Lord and is rightly disposed, then it may contain all the bodies. This is as may he be exalted and indicated in the saying, say, both the ancients and those of later times shall be gathered together to the appointed time of a known day. In response to those who asked, what shall we be raised up again, or our forefathers, the ancients? The seventh objection is that it is known from the book and from tradition that paradise and hell have already been created today. Since they are both corporeal in nature according to this naive literal view, that would necessitate either the interpenetration of bodies in the same place or a denial that the that the outermost sphere actually bounds the universe? The proper answer to this has already been given in section 2C, 3E, and 4A above, and may be understood from the fact that paradise and hell are behind the veils of the material heavens and earth. As for those who do not enter the houses by their doors, sometimes they respond to this objection by denying that paradise and hell had yet been created, sometimes by saying that the heavens might be torn open enough to contain them within the physical cosmos, and sometimes by admitting the possibility of the interpenetration of bodies. If only such people had simply acknowledged their incapacity and had contented themselves with the uncritical acceptance of the scriptural account, saying, "We do not know. God and his messenger know best." Number 5, principle concerning what survives in the other world of the parts of a man and the prophetic allusion to the punishment in the grave. Know that when the spirit has become separated from the elemental body, there still remains with it something having a weak being. In the prophetic tradition, this was called the root of the tail. People have differed greatly concerning its meaning. Thus, it was said by some theologians that it was the original part of the body, and it was said by certain philosophers that it was the material intellect or simply prime matter. Abu Hamid al-Ghazali said that it was only the soul and the other world arose out of this. The theologian Abu Yazid Waqwaghi said that it was an atom that survived in this world. And the author of the Futuhat al-Makkiyah, the Meccan Revelations, that is the famous magnum opus of Ibn Arabi, said that they were the eternal archetypal substances, or the ayana thabita. Each of these has a point. Demonstrative proof, however, indicates that what remains is the imaginal power of the soul, which is a substance essentially separate from the body. This imaginal power is the last of the first physical modality of being and the beginning of the other world's modality of being. Thus, when the soul is separated from the body, it carries the perceiving form along with itself, so that it can perceive bodily, sensible things and see them immediately with its inner sense. This creative power encompasses the various kinds of sensible things and is the original source of all the senses, as you have learned. The soul then conceives of its individual body in the same form which it has had in this world when it died. Because of the closeness of its connection with the body in this life, it conceives of its essence as still being the same as the man who was buried and who died in this form. Thus, it may find that its body has been buried, and it may feel the sufferings that overtake it in the manner of the sensible punishments according to what has been described in the true religious law. This is the punishment in the grave, mentioned in the various religious traditions. And if the soul conceives of its essence in an agreeable form and has free dominion over existing things, then this is the reward of the grave. In other words, if it doesn't freak out at the moment of death that it has died, if it truly is detached at that moment of physical death, then that is the felicity. This is what is alluded to in the prophetic saying, the grave is either one of the gardens of paradise or one of the pits of hell. That is, you either freak out, in which case you're creating your own torment by virtue of freaking out because you've died, or you feel a sense of liberation from the fact that you are liberated from the body limitation, and that is its own elation, its own expansion. Then, when the time arrives for the resurrection and the rising, the soul may be mounted on a body that is fitting for paradise and its delights. If it is one of the blessed or on a body that is appropriate for hell and its pains, it is one of the wretched sinners. Above all, you must not believe that what man sees after his death of the horrors of the grave and the various states of the resurrection are merely imagined things, without any being in concrete reality, as was claimed by certain Muslims who clung to the coattails of the philosophers. For whoever believes that is an unbeliever in the religious law and strays far from true wisdom and philosophy. Rather, the things experienced in the rising and the states of the other world are more powerful in their being and more intensely real and actual than these forms existing in earthly matter, which are the objects generated from the elements by means of motion or earthly time. For the forms of the other world are either suspended from their intelligible essences or subsist in the region of the soul, which is the most subtle of all materials. And that was the end of the second mashriq in its second section, which I find probably one of the most fascinating parts, especially these last two that we just finished reading. And the floor is open to you all for any questions, commentary, gripes, revelations that you might have. This basically clarified the discussion that Hossein and I were having last week. That just hilarious point that he raised before about, if a man were to be the food for another man, then which of them is, rising at the resurrection, which is tormented, and which is, given pleasure, heavenly pleasure, is just spot on. It just completely demolishes this literalist reading of eschatology in any of the Abrahamic creeds. So it's open. Floor is open to you now. Whoever wants to go first. Jeff, you were having good laugh there.
Yeah, I'm not sure I have any point to make, except that was hilarious. The whole thing, like both sections, I laughed all the way through. He's got a great sense of humor. I don't know if he was trying to be funny, but yeah, I found that really funny. And yeah, that's the first thing I wanted to say anyway.
Yeah, he gets
Um,
his some of the examples that he brings up in the first book of the Aspar, where he's demolishing reincarnation in a very, very systematic and protracted way. The first time I ever read those, I just had to put the book down and just laugh for hours because
yeah,
his rhetorical style is like, completely mastered Aristotle's rhetorics. And the ironies that he brings forth, he just has tons of examples like this about reincarnation. It's pure comedy, what he says.
it it is, and I really like where I don't know if I can find it quickly here, but how he says it's better to just, you know, the religion of old women. What did he say about
Yeah.
that? If oh God. Oh, I'm sorry. I can't remember what he said, and I can't
Yeah,
find it
the
right
point
quick, but
is it's better to be a naive believer, the example of
yes.
the religion of old women, and say, I don't know, rather than to kind of speculate in the asinine way that a few of these Muslim theologians are well known for doing. I mean, he brought up the example of Fakhr Razi, who otherwise is a very interesting thinker, except what he did, he was a theologian basically, but he took Aristotelianism and used it to sometimes, weave some of the most laughable sophistry in some of the theological points that he raises. And Mulla Sadra didn't like Fakhr Razi at all. And this isn't just the first instance. He brings him up several times in the Asfar and several other works and just ridicules him like this, like what he just did here. So, but yeah, the points are solid. I mean, it's just like, this misses the point when you're trying to even bring reincarnation forward as sort of what happens at the general resurrection when all of the bodies are raised and they're judged at that time, right? What happened? I mean, if a man is a food for another man, which is the example I brought up last week, then what's happening here? How do these two get raised? It's
Yeah,
so
I
the
know.
only conclusion is that the way that he's symbolically unpacking all of this stuff, he says it's better to do it this way then and or not do it at all and just say you don't know. I just don't know.
Yeah, and endless speculation and conjecture gets you nowhere, really. I mean,
Yeah.
that's misses the whole point of the exercise. Um, the Asfar, have you read the Asfar?
Yeah.
Is it like I can't imagine like this is so good, this translation and introduction to Mulla Sadra. I can't imagine the depth and scope of the Asfar because this is
Amazing.
pretty deep. And I mean, like this is
Amazing.
covering all the bases as far as I'm concerned. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm sure the Asfar probably isn't directly translated into English, so
It
that's
should
why we're
be.
doing this.
It ought to be. I've read it twice actually. Once in the critical edition that Hassan the Al-Muli made about 20 years ago now. That came out in about 11 volumes. And he had his own glosses on this, which were really good. That was the Arabic text of it. And then Muhammad Khajavi, who was late Muhammad Khajavi, who was a Persian translator of all this kind of stuff, he also translated the whole thing with his own glosses. And so I also read through that, mainly for the glosses, but while you're reading glosses, he's got a Persian translation there as well. So I read through all of that as well. And
Wow.
yeah, the Asfar is awesome. It really, really, you know, it really nails a lot of things. There's a lot of um, philosophical historiography in it based on the Muslim point of view. So you have these very long excursus where he's talking about the Stoics and the Epicureans and
Okay.
the both the Platonic and the Aristotelian schools in their historical trajectory, how the Muslims know, and that for itself is quite interesting stuff.
Right. Okay. Thank you. I'm sure I have something else to say, but I'd like to hear somebody else speak now at
But
this
hey,
point. Thank you.
now that you put it, I mean, people like me are starting to age, but some of these younger scholars that are coming up, really a project like translating the Asfar fully annotated, doing the kind of stuff that James Morris did with this book is something that is seriously called for.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, this should be essential reading for anyone who has a serious mind about, the whole process of spiritual wayfaring and, or at least on a lower level, just intellectual curiosity, developing, intellectual ideas philosophically. Yeah, this is required reading. And where has this been all my life? It's amazing.
The good thing about figures like Mulla Sadra or Ibn Arabi is that you don't necessarily have to be a confessional Muslim to appreciate these guys. And their system and framework is such because they're Neoplatonists that they can basically be applied to any religious creed, you know. And
Right.
you can
Yes.
take all the symbolisms of Christianity, Judaism, Hinduism, whatever, and apply it, all of these
Yeah.
principles to that. Yeah,
Right. Thank you. Yes.
sure thing.
Just a comment so far, but reading this reminded me a lot about Emanuel Swedenborg and his writings. There's a similar emphasis on other states of reality being imaginal. The sort of a visionary world behind the world of matter. So I got a lot of impressions. There's some intersections there.
There's a lot. Yeah, absolutely. Definitely. The only thing I would say with the Manuel Swedenborg is that what disappointed me is that when he was attacked by Immanuel Kant, if he had the kind of rigorous philosophical training of a Mulla Sadra, he would have been able to answer Kant
Yeah,
and
I agree with you
demolish
on
him.
that.
Yeah,
He was more trained in the sciences of his day, and I don't think he had that kind of philosophical rigor to respond to his polemicists. Whereas Mullah Sadra has no problem doing that and
yeah.
doing it hilariously, as we've seen.
Can you imagine a back and forth between Kant and Mulla Sadra?
I think he would have actually gotten Kant to express emotion.
Yeah, I've always fantasized about that. A Mulla Sadra Manual Kant, polemic.
Well, perhaps we could have AI give us a sketch of that scenario.
Yeah, sure. That would be something. Good
Yeah.
idea. Oh boy. Anybody else?
Yeah, I've got something that I was thinking about. So there's this whole idea of a. Oh, sorry.
Then go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, sorry. I didn't know if Nathan was saying something.
Oh no,
So there's
I'm
this. Okay, great. So there's this whole idea of your sort of development as a person, as sort of instantiating these divine names in terms of your behavior or in your inner experience. And obviously, how do I articulate what I'm trying to say? So there's this notion that the sort of challenges that we face in our lives are things that we respond to, and that sort of enable us to grow in certain directions. And our experiences are one of those, right? Like the experience of the Wayfarer is contingent upon having these sort of like developmental experiences. And there's always this notion of like possibility there. You're always sort of at like a fork in the road. I was wondering within this current of thought whether there's any sort of reality assigned to these possible selves that each person has.
Yeah, of
and
course.
what those sort of
The possible selves are all contained in the universal self. And this also then goes to the issue of free will and predestination, which is a very involved topic, but it's kind of presupposed in a lot of what Mulla Sadra is saying. But to kind of shorthand the whole equation here, Mulla Sadra would say, because this touches on the issue of moral ambiguity, that where these questions are concerned, when you pick for yourself the best possible moral option, even if it is not, the most optimal moral option in a given equation, you have actually chosen the right thing, right? Provided that the choice that you're making does not have negative repercussions for for those around you. It's not a selfish based kind of option, moral option that you've taken in a given equation. Even if it may not be the best possible one, or maybe not even 100% ethical in certain situations, but it is the only option available to do something, that is still the best option to take.
I see. Okay, that makes sense, because whenever somebody chooses something, even if they make the wrong decision, there's going to be something pulling them in that decision. And what I'm thinking is, because of the ubiquity of the names, there's probably one name pulling them in that direction. Maybe that's not the name they should have instantiated, but it's still pulling them.
Well, I kind of touched on this in the prologue of this refutation that I'm doing on Abdullah Hashim. Look, from this overall perspective, right, the devil is always present because it is the manifestation of the name of God, Al-Mudhil. And so all the names are contained in each other, just like Ibn Arabi told us. So, the guide, Al-Hadi, can very easily become the Mudhil based on a range of choices that are either, made from ego or made from the non-self, or from a good place rather from the bad place. But even still, that you cannot really bank on that, because certain angry decisions can actually be the right one in a certain situation, and weaker decisions could be the wrong one in another situation, such that if you respond passively in one situation, it could actually be the name misguider, whereas you should have been forceful about it, right? And if you had been forceful about it, you had actually been guided by the name the guide, right? But how you distinguish that is something that is part of the development, the cognitive and pneumatic development of the Wayfarer. Because, most average people, most average adults don't know, can't intuit their way, through these kinds of situations. But the goal is that you are so spiritually developed that you can intuit these various trajectories of causalities based on one choice or another. And this is one of the reasons why the spiritual path and these exercises and these practices, the praxis, is so important, because it cultivates these sorts of very deep intuitive faculties to then be able to make one choice over another choice.
Okay, I see. There's something that I'm interested in regarding the role of the intellect of all of this. Because we have seen in history that there have been very intelligent people who've led us down the road of madness. Think of like somebody like John von Neumann, who is said to have been able to multiply 4-digit numbers in his head by the time he was a child, and he came up with this insane idea of mutually assured destruction that ended up being extremely important. Well, not important, but influential.
There's intellect with a capital I, the nous, and then there is, the intellect, the akale jozi, the ratiocination. And, one thing, at least, the Sufi texts are always saying is that, this thing can become extremely, it can mislead you to the point of thinking that that ratiocination is gnosis itself. Right? But it's still partial, and it can make mistakes at any time. Whereas the content of gnosis and noetic knowledge, especially as you start to get very deep into it, does not, its margins of error become less and less and less and less. And it's immediate.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Just wondering about some political figures making judgments based on the so-called greater good and collateral damage of those decisions. What constitutes the greater good? Is it, like for a population, one population, which is more people concerned with say a local population, which is basically, decimated?
Well, these greater good arguments, especially when we look at history, are always extremely partial, always ego-based, and always latched onto by demagogues, because the greater good that they're talking about is the greater bad for another collective. There's never a greater good that is encompassing of all populations. Like, for instance, the classic example that we're confronted with at the moment is Israel. Oh, they did this, and on October 7th, they did that, and so we have to destroy, first it's Hamas, okay, destroy this organization, which you yourselves created, but then this now is extended into the entire Palestinian population as an outright genocide, because, these right-wing Zionist leaders believe that the greater good of the Jewish people, as they like to think, can only be good when there are no Palestinians, or the Palestinians have been so cut to size, literally, in their population, that they do not pose any kind of a significant long-term threat to the Jewish state. But this is a complete fallacy, because any greater good in its premises must be inclusive of everything. Not just one group of people, but all group of people. And that is why these greater good arguments on the political domain always get latched onto when they're not fleshed out properly, and they become very oppositional kind of discourses, end up in the same place that we've been seeing over and over again, in genocide of one people of another. Whether it's the Zionists of the Palestinians, the Germans of the Jews, and Gypsies, and everybody else that they consider to be Untermenschen, the subhumans, and on and on and on it goes. A true greater good has to, in my opinion, come from a place, a sacred noetic place of the kind of stuff that Mulla Sadra is talking about, which is incidentally a political theory that I've been very slowly and deliberately working on for about 30 years now. The theophanocracy, neither theocracy in the way that we have it, or the secular democracy that basically denudes all meaning out of the world. There has to be a mean, a middle ground between these two, because both of these are extremes. So a greater good that takes even the primacy of being as a political axiom, then has to consider of every configuration existing within that being, such that you look at the entire world as a finely tuned instrument. And if one thing is out of whack, then the whole thing doesn't work. So if you have one string plucked out of your piano, then the piano is worthless. But politics and political theory up to this point, by and large, there have been theorists who doesn't really think in those terms, right? Cannot come from a place of seeing not just humanity, but everything that exists as being various dimensions of the manifestation of God, right? Certain people talk about, the axiom of the oneness of humanity and that sort of thing, but they stop right there. What this sort of perspective is saying is that everything is a manifestation of God. Not just other humans, but everything in front of you. So once you approach this sort of a question from that point of view, then you can talk about the greater good. Because from that point of view, then what behooves a political theorist or a politician or a leader or leaders, rather, is how to fine-tune everything such that nobody within this greater collective is harmed. I would also say that one of the fundamental flaws of, Marxist-Leninist collectivism has been precisely not to come from this point of view. The collective, in the way that at least Lenin framed it, became basically the will of the vanguard party. And, the actual collective, the people, the workers, the proletariat that they thought they were advocating on behalf became just this amorphous, kind of soulless thing. And that's a mistake. Whereas what we got to do, I think, is to take these sorts of ideas that we find in Mulla Sadra and Ibn Arabi and similar seriously, right? And from there begin to formulate political theories that then can very critically approach this question of the greater good in a proper way, and not in the way that the demagogues have approached it.
It seems like there's always a disconnect between achieving security and being able to extend trust.
Well, this comes in my world, right? In my theology, the original sin is authoritarianism. So I've kind of taken the argument that Jean-Jacques Rousseau starts his treatise on the origins of inequality and taken up at a step. This impulse in human beings to dominate, right, is the root of the problem in everything that humanity seems to have experienced over the last 20, 40, 50,000 years. And in my opinion, this is the problem that we need to overcome if we are ever to create a just society. Doesn't mean that we create a utopia. That's impossible. And as you've probably seen, every utopianic experiment has ended up in kind of an authoritarian nightmare and dystopia. So, but this problem of authoritarianism is the root of everything. And until we resolve it, find a way to resolve this thing properly, then we are stuck. Because this problem roots into everything. It roots into ecocide. It roots into, the fractured relationship between the genders that everybody's experiencing at the moment. It roots into the political and geopolitical domain, on and on. This urge to dominate, my way or the highway, in everything. Whereas when you come to a proper understanding of cooperative kind of thinking, but one that is based on an ontology, not just, platitudes, but actual philosophically rigorous ontological perspective and begin to then act very slowly and deliberately to resolve these things, beginning at the level of the human psyche itself. So what is required essentially is that you create environments where people can genuinely resolve their own psychological baggage around the issue of authoritarianism. So, which usually entails, people's experience or negative experiences of their childhood with their parents or teachers and peers and that sort of thing. You offer that environment for people to resolve that, because it is these formative experiences that then later on in life start to translate into how human beings begin to act in the world, whether, immediately in their interpersonal relationship or further, into their work and then even the political environment, right? So once we begin to tackle this specific question very seriously, it is obvious that then over time we can start to then resolve this problem of authoritarianism and make that leap that humanity needs to make.
So are you pretty much thinking that basically a trauma-based world that we live in is one of the first essential kind of aspects of human condition and nature that needs to be
1000%. And where does this come from? My conclusion has been that it comes from this paradigm of authoritarianism, and this thing seems to replicate itself in a variety of different ways, in human relationship. Rousseau, in his treatise The Origin of Inequality, claims that the first human who said mine was the real originator of human society, and everything went downhill from there. He's right about that. But what he doesn't seem to fully get, in my opinion, is what that paradigm is that propels that human to do that, right? So that this is where we need to go. We need to investigate and interrogate that and get to the root of that. Once we get to the root of that, then we can talk about other things. And in my opinion, these sorts of perspective, as we have in Ibn Arabi, Mulla Sadra, the Bayan, and all these kind of theosophical perspectives offer us that very powerful metaphysical template to begin to tackle these sorts of problems. Because if you look around you right now, we're living in a time where the legitimacy of democracy is increasingly under question without really people understanding all the various layers that are involved with even democratic theory itself, because the immediate association is with liberalism and democracy, and this in itself is a fallacy, because liberalism is about the protection of property rights. It's not about democratia, right? Democratia, the rule of the people, is, if you take that as the fundamental axiom, then liberalism by definition is actually an antithesis to this.
Yeah,
because it's only advocating for a very specific, caste or class of people in a given society. But because of the times that we're living in, the systems in the liberal West have become very corrupt, a lot of, kleptocracy and that sort of thing that are corrupted into systems. So people, look at the democracy as an idea as discredited and start to gravitate towards more authoritarian, theocratic, and that's, those sorts of paradigms. One of the basis of my critique of this so-called Ahmadi religion of light and peace is precisely based on this, because their so-called TikTok Mahdi is advocating for a theocracy, a literal theocracy, which he calls the divine just state. And this is going backwards, completely backwards. Humanity needs to move forward, not go backward. And by moving forward, we just have to be aware of what those phantoms are in the proverbial machine that have prevented, a real development, a real evolutionary development in human beings to get to where they're going. Because we can attain a better world even with the AI, in fact, because of artificial intelligence, we have the possibility to attain a more equitable, optimum world. Because AI then can take over certain functions that have weighed too heavily on humanity, And humanity can now basically look at developing itself in areas that it previously either ignored or whatnot. So I don't look at any of these developments at all as being bad. It's
Well,
just,
that's what they said about the motor car.
or even the motor car,
Would allow humans less time and commuting and
Yeah.
and more for leisure, etc.
more for leisure, spending time with their families, all that kind of stuff. The stuff that's really required to create a person or that can contemplate. Human beings who can contemplate properly are less weighed down by the problems that the world naturally brings to them. Okay. So all of these things have to be taken into consideration. So, contrary to this current trend that we're seeing with this incessant push by certain, subcultures moving towards authoritarianism and validating theocracy and fascism, things that we thought 20 years ago were permanently discredited ideas are now making a comeback.
What was Rousseau's? Was he like a secular thinker, or do you have any?
He's one of the most eminent social theorists of the European Enlightenment. In fact, people say that he was the ideological founding father of the French Revolution. He's a very important thinker, and in democratic theory, he's probably one of the first people you ever read.
So what law does he ascribe to, if any?
And equality. I mean, the whole égalité thinking that became the clarion call of the French Revolution is really something that he, more than even Voltaire and some of these other people, he really put this out there. And there are problems with a lot of stuff he says, but that particular treatise, The Origins of Inequality, and his other one, The Social Contract, are two of the most seminal political tracts of the last 300-400 years. Most of the theory that we have had in democracy over the last 300-400 years has come directly from those two, more than even someone like John Locke or that. It was basically Rousseau, and particularly The Social Contract. And The Social Contract in particular, you find echoes of it, very distinct and unequivocal echoes of it in documents like the American Declaration of Independence. Although they didn't go as far as some of the things that Rousseau was advocating.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, the echoes of it are there. And even the American Constitution.
Thank you very much.
Sure thing.
I've been kind of falling behind on the reading, but I have this kind of leftover thoughts from what we talked about last time, and that message that you posted, Wahid, on the Telegram was really insightful. That it seems like Sheikh Ahmed is making this distinction within. The way that I heard it is kind of a distinction within the elemental body, like between the composition of the elemental body and the animation. And I wonder if that's different from what Mulla Sadra is saying. Mulla Sadra is like making a distinction between a psychic or imaginal body and what we could call elemental body. But it seems like Ahsai is going.
What the difference is this: Mulla Sadra is actually the distinction that the both of them are almost identical. Only difference is that Sheikh Ahmed is becoming more precise in what precisely are the distinctions between the two. Mulla Sadra is just talking in generalities. But even Mulla Sadra, if you remember in that section 5, I think it's in D or in E, he is saying, or no, actually it's in A and B, that the actual elements themselves, the actual physical elements are irrelevant to this body or this imaginal soul that he calls that Sheikh Ahmed calls the body. It's just a semantic difference, but the argument is almost identical in what the two of them are saying.
Does Asai not make an ontological distinction between a elemental and hurqali body? Like there's a kind of
but but this is exactly the same thing that Mulla Sadra is saying as well.
That's
Yeah.
how I understand Mulla Sadra. But then I thought that Asai was going a little bit more precise with the elemental body and saying that there's a kind of like, I don't know how he explains it, but like even this body that I have is itself kind of dual, that there's an element,
yes, dual, but only as long as you're animate and you're alive. Okay, that differentiation or distinction is complete at the moment of your death. Because if to use the peripatetic language, that dualitude between your huarqalyawi body and your elemental body is something that is present while you live with your feet in two worlds. But the minute you pass away, then there's really one. Or rather there's three, beyond the elemental body. But that is the distinction. But there's really no difference, because what Mulla Sadra is saying about the soul, right, and the soul being the emanator of the body is exactly what Asai is saying as well. It's because it is the huarqalyawi jism, right, that is responsible for the animation of the unsuri jasad, the elemental body. And Asai is deliberately using the word jasad. I mean, jasad is corpse in any other context.
Okay, that clarifies it. Because I mean, Sadra does also want to say that the soul and the body are unified as long as the body is alive. I mean, I still have questions about how exactly there can be a unity between these two kinds of things. But
bi-unity, a bi-unity. It's a bi-unity. It's a unus ambo.
Right. After the soul becomes sensible, right? Because there's still that ambiguity in Sadra that there's a kind of pure corporeality of the soul, and then it kind of becomes, within this life, it becomes sensible or sensing.
That has to do with what Sadra, and also to extend Asai and all of these guys are saying, that a person who realizes or properly individuates fully in their spirituality comes to that complete sensibleness or sensibility, whatever, in this life. Whereas the majority of human beings who don't attain that level are as if they are, zombies, for lack of a better way to put it. Asai also says this. Even so, going so far in one part of his Shahr Ziyara to very unequivocally impute that the vast majority of people who don't, really attain these higher spiritual levels of consciousness are really dead, because they have nothing to walk into at the moment of death. They haven't developed that, that resurrection body. But he doesn't actually, posit this as an axiom. It's just a suggestion that he makes.
Okay. So to get to the, when I was asking this question, I think behind it I have a more existential concern, which is just thinking about the different kinds of techniques that we have, like the different practices of embodiment, and just trying to contextualize that in the framework of Mulla Sadra. When he says things like, when any kind of Neoplatonic thinker says things about the body as being pure nothingness or non-existence, or thinking eschatologically that this goes away. It just makes me question like what happens to there's this sort of real strong push in modern like healing modalities and psychology to sort of deal with the nervous system and practice embodiment and grounding in the body. And so it just occurs to me like what is being talked about and what makes that necessary from this kind of perspective, if we're ultimately going to let this go and go beyond
here, let me say, here's where I diverge with Mulla Sadra and also a lot of Orthodox Platonists. I don't have this animus towards the physical that they do, and especially the body. I guess probably I get that from the Tantra, because I do agree with these guys in that system, that this vehicle of the body is what we have in order to realize the spiritual. You can't short circuit that process. It is an alchemical process. So you are basically transmuting your own body in order to get to the stone, which is yourself, right? So I don't agree with that perspective that wants to shun this and that sort of thing. I look at ascesis or ascesis as merely a stage, same as Ibn Arabi did. It's not the be-all and end-all everything. It's a training process and a training modality, after which is completely superfluous. What the contemporary healing modalities are saying, by and large, in my opinion, are correct, but they're just not making that next leap. To what end? Right? So the body must be integrated. All elements, the healing of the body. I mean, that old saying, healthy mind, healthy body. You can also turn it backwards and say, healthy body, healthy mind. Right? Because the nervous system does influence the manner in which your particular experience of your wayfaring is either going to be optimized or not. Right? So let's give a very simple example. If you're sitting in meditation and all you're thinking about is how your back is uncomfortable and you're not focusing on your breathing or the mantra, whatever, then that entire exercise is a waste of time. But this is what, by and large, happens in a lot of these traditions where they tell you that, well, you got to train yourself to forget your body completely. Forget your body, and then you'll get it. But then people sit in meditation for years, and they're, every day that they're sitting in meditation, they're still being bothered by their lower back or whatever. Whereas with the tantric perspective is that even the pain that you're feeling in your body needs to be transmuted in that meditative process. So you have to go fully into it, in order to transmute it. And we're talking about transmutation. We're not talking about shunning. And transmutation comes from a place of paradox, where pain and pleasure start to kind of flow in and out of each other. And when you get into that area of meditative practice, that in itself becomes a very meditative and awakening kind of thing. And this is why the Kundalini within the tantric schools is so important, and why it's all basically cold at the base of your spine, and you're supposed to ignite it from the base of your spine, is because when you understand this dynamic of pain and pleasure as being a continuum of the same thing, right? And the way that they graph it, then they graph it in the masculine and feminine trajectory, Ida and Pingala, sun and the moon, etc. When you truly start to experience that within your own self, is at the point where this Kundalini completely comes alive, right? And so you have basically created your proverbial resurrection body within yourself at this very moment. You've attained the opus. But you have to feel every ounce of the pain, every ounce of the discomfort, everything, and not shun it. This is where I think the Platonists, most of the Orthodox Platonists, don't quite get it. Because this is the body we have, right? It's what Lord of Being has given us to realize with. This is the vehicle. So with all of his imperfections, or at least what we perceive as to be imperfections at given time, this is what we have to realize it. So we need to realize the perfection within the imperfection of ourselves. And this can take a variety of approaches. You can do it with, the time for Kundalini meditation. Some people take other paths. But what I think is a bad idea is to shun the body and to, basically dismiss the physical. I think that Gnostic capital G approach is a mistaken approach to things.
So it does seem like all of these different schools of thought are focusing on something like it's this body, but it's this body insofar as it's animated. It's still that kind of subtle, whatever that subtlety is that's flowing through the elements. That's kind of, when we say grounding in the body, we're grounding in that, and that is sensible, and so that is where the pleasures and the pains are.
Absolutely. And if you think about it this way, if you start to gain knowledge, experiential knowledge of the elements, then naturally, then the next stage is then to start gaining experiential gnosis of what is animating the elements, right? And on you build from that. So you build from the ground up. This is one of the things that, for example, the Chaksari Sufis are Iran mean when they say that the way to heaven is through the earth being yourself. But you can also take it as, the physical earth. That you can't get there through any other way. You don't get anywhere from escape. You don't get to heaven through the clouds. You get it right where you are.
Okay, that clarifies things. Thank you.
Sure thing. Hassan, are you there?
Yes, Saidi. I here want to continue from the discussion with Hussein. So does it mean the place it were mentioned that the soul is جسمانية الحدوث, that it does not literally mean that in its inception the soul is material, but just in its inception at the beginning stages, the focus of the soul is completely material, but then in its progress, it becomes more transcendent.
Yeah, but provided that we don't take material as only one modality of physicality. Because as I've been saying, that there are dimensions of materiality. It's not just the physical, it's also the imaginal. Yes, so yeah, more or less. Yeah, pretty much.
Okay, the next thing, again, in the context you have said, can you say then little bit more about fasting, the Saum, what it really is supposed to be originally, as kind of, and that's on one side. And also, if you can comment why as Suhrawardi is putting such stress on it. Is it this, let's say, negative kind of Gnostic, how to say, ignoring just of material, or it's have a higher ends?
Yes and no. I think with Suhrawardi there's something very specific, because I actually did some of the things that he recommended for a lot of years just to try it out. And my conclusion was this: the kind of fasting and vegetarianism that Suhrawardi recommends is because, and especially if you're in an optimum environment to do it, it orients you much better in your practice, right? Because as human beings, we're, experiencing this world through a biochemical vehicle, right? So what we are eating is having a biochemical impact that is giving us stimulus and information about the world through it. So if you are periodically fasting, right, and if you practice, in my opinion, periodic vegetarianism, it balances the body by balancing out these various biochemical stimuli and input that may get overloaded and saturated over a period of time with too much stuff. And I mean, at the moment, in this current civilization that we're living in, I mean, much of what we're eating has all kinds of chemicals and preservatives and stuff attached to it that are very lethal. And we don't even know what kind of influence these things may be having on our minds. Okay. But I think even if it is a periodic thing, you don't have to do it all the time. But for periodic, like say you take 40 days out of a year and you fast and you go completely vegetarian for that. At the end of this process, you will feel the difference. You have detoxified your body, you've balanced these biochemical functions, because this, fleshy carbon body is a vehicle of habit, right? And so what we're doing with fasting and vegetarianism for a short duration is karaga adat, in essence. That is what we're doing, right? And I think that fundamentally when we, kind of layer back things in the Quran or even in some of these other traditions about fasting, that this is really the intention that they're trying to tell us, that when you fast or you go vegetarian while fasting for a period of time, you're basically just realigning yourself. It's all about you. It's not ultimately about the good or bad pleasure of God, really.
Okay, thank you. And some I have some questions. They are kind of trivial, but they are related to the context in which Mulla Sadra here is making his comments and explanation. That related to the Aristotelian framework. But the problem, you which was posed, how we can how can exist infinite number of soul which should get through the finite material space. Now, my question is not about the solution of the problem, but about its premises. Why it is supposed that the material world should be finite, the first thing, and the second, why the numbers of the soul is supposed to be infinite?
Well, he's talking about the other world in that particular argument, not this world, right? And the reason why they cannot be indefinite is because there is generation and corruption in the material world, things coming into being and pass away, which means that one of its laws is that it cannot contain an infinity of things simultaneously. But in the other side, because these spatio-temporal laws are no longer operative, the speculation by theologians has been about, well, there's a world where there is an infinity of, indefinite amount of souls, everyone who has been and will be and is and all that. And Mulla Sadra is saying, well, this is a stupid argument because each soul is an infinite world unto itself.
Okay, now I get the problem because they imagine the other world to be the same physical world,
Exactly. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then exactly
Yeah.
the problem arises.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, uh, and here, this is oh yeah, yes. The point where Mullah Sadra says that if you can make a more extensive comment a little bit more, that in the first moment after the death, because the soul didn't realize what happened in the first moment, the soul conceives itself still as the physical body it was in its previous life, but after that, with the passing of time, with the process, it realizes its new stage, and it is, let's say, the next phase of the greater resurrections, when the souls moves from the, let's say, the imaginal space of alamul mithal to the noetic space of pure intellect. If you can just comment a little bit more.
How do we get there? What is the question?
Uh, the very process that let's say after or right after the death,
Well, hold
the
on.
soul is
You remember?
still attached to
Yeah.
the form of
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
the
Okay.
progress it makes.
Okay. Remember, what was it, a couple of sessions ago, or maybe it was the last session, where Sadra says, he talks about the people who experience the felicity and the people who experience the terror. And then there are those that are beyond even paradise or hell. Those are the people that are, that have united with this Jabaruti realm of the pure, abstract intellect. They're at that level of pure abstraction that is beyond the pleasures or pains of either one of these two sides of the dialectic. Now, what we got to understand, this is an implication that Sadra makes here, he makes in the Asfar, he also several times makes it also in the Shawahid al-Rububiyah, is that what is meant by the felicity of the grave or the terror of the grave is all dependent on the development of the soul that is buried. So a soul that has lived the Platonic philosophical life, or has practiced the religion of old women for at the moment of death, has a very pleasant resurrection, right? Whereas those people who have been covetous their whole life, their whole soul is twisted around this world and acquisition, and they've been fascists and control freaks and all that kind of thing, are going to have a very horrifying experience when they are detached from their body. They will be completely disoriented, and that disorientation is their hell. I mean, what kind of hell can be worse than that? Imagine if you're someone, let's say, like whether Hitler or Trump or some mass murderer like Pol Pot. At the moment of their death, given what they have done through their whole life, and given how a soul that commits these sorts of mass crimes is inclined in a certain way to look at the world, is a covetous soul, right? Then at that moment where that limitation is completely taken, where this material reality is just completely ridiculous, and there are other factors far more important than that they haven't considered, then their experience is terrifying. especially since, then they're judging through their, if you want to take it from the NDE perspective, and near death experience, you have this whole life review. And in that life review, you have a complete review together with all the ramifications and endless causalities that your actions have unleashed, right? And you are the one that here is now judging yourself. You are the light at the end of that tunnel, right? That experience is absolutely terrifying. Beyond any burning flames and, ugly looking ogres and demons and that sort of thing, right? Whereas someone who is light, who's done the best they can, who's either, followed the philosophic or, sagely life, or been amongst the religion of old women, in the way that Mulla Sadra puts it at the end of that particular section, then they just light. It's very light. They're not holding on to anything. They've resolved these basic problems of the ego. They're not attached. They're not magnetically pulled down. And so they rise.
Yes, because they have resolved the problem even before in their life. There is no the shock and the surprise, and that will happen with the bad souls. Let's generally say
Yeah.
so, which they experience in their moment of death. Okay, thank
Yeah.
you very much, Sadie.
Sure thing. Good thing. All right, folks, we have gone for the full 1 hour and 45 minutes. If anybody doesn't have anything else,
Wait a minute.
go for it. Go for it.
It's only been an hour and a half. So we
Okay.
still have time.
All right. All right.
Because I
All right. You wanna keep
I
going?
have another question.
Okay, go for it. Go for it. Go for it.
Sorry to interrupt you there.
No worries. No worries.
I just wanted to say two things very quick. Well, first of all, I love this. Well, never mind that.
No, go
I
ahead.
was
Go
going
ahead.
to ask, well, earlier we were talking about how, like, this is not, it's not, you don't necessarily have to be, have an Islamic background or be a Muslim to appreciate this kind of writing. And like, for example, I love this expression, those who do not enter the houses by their doors.
Hmm.
And, I mean, obviously those who know, the door is the city of the knowledge of, Ali is the door, right? And so, but if you didn't know that, you'd still, you could still appreciate that expression. But anyway, that's not my point. My question has to do with this idea. Where is it here? The the root of the tail. I had a little bit of a problem with the root of the tail, and I just wonder, like, at a certain point, does this, the continuing survival of the individual, this is like the beginning of, oh shoot. Sorry, I lost my train of thought, but I'm wondering at what point the tail just disappears. Like, do you think at some point, the whole idea of the root of the tail just kind of goes away? Or are we continuously going to be stuck with this idea of a persisting individual, like forever into,
No, I mean,
all the way up the
no,
ontologically?
no. I think there is a point that this disappeared. And what I just said to Hassan about the Gnostics who are, transcended the dialectic of paradise and hell and inferno. They're the ones where the root of the tail disappears.
Right.
Their individuality, or at least their egoic individuality. It's completely gone. Because when you break it down, even within what either Ibn Arabi or Mulla Sadra are saying about the nature of paradise and hell, they themselves are also implying that either or of these two are still inhabiting a sort of egoic reality, right? Because reward and punishment revolves around this. I am a good person, so I'm getting X. I've been a bad person, so I'm getting my butt kicked for this. This is all still egoic. Whereas those who have transcended this dialectic are beyond it. So whether they walk into hell, they're experiencing bliss, whether they're in heaven, they're beyond it. It's beyond this false dichotomy of, reward and punishment
Right.
at that highest noetic level. So at that highest noetic level, there's no root of the tail anymore.
Right. Okay. And basically my concern is just the very concept of individuality, like the individual itself. We seem to want to imagine and project even into the other world, a continuation of our individuality as we conceive of it in this world,
Well, on the
which
one
is
hand,
part.
on the one hand, you can say that particular individuality, because it is an idea in one of the infinite ideas in the mind of God, is itself an immutable archetypal essence. So its persistence is pre-eternal and post-eternal. But so that resolves the problem right there.
Right.
But the thing is that for the wayfarer was trying to transcend it and come to a realization of this in its true, ontological grounding within themselves. That means that you have to let go of it.
Right.
And that really-
Which
Go ahead.
to me is almost the remedy to what you were talking about earlier about the urge for domination.
Yes.
It's to me, it's the same thing as the urge to hold on, the urge to cling to.
Yeah.
And if we can let go, then that seems to be like the answer or the solution, to
10,000%.
you know what I'm saying?
This
Yeah.
is, really, this is basically a spiritual problem. The problem of authoritarianism is the problem of the ego, right?
Yeah.
And you can make that association of the ego with the soul that inclines to evil, the nafs al-amara, right? And these texts in the beginning of the Quran are telling us, to transcend that level. So, a critical faculty that can look at both the authoritarianism of itself as well as the authoritarianism of the world had now taken that next leap. So they're at the stage of the nafs al-lawama, but there are then further stages before we come to the stage of absolute felicity, right? When this problem is completely resolved. So absolutely, the problem of authoritarianism is that rooted basic spiritual problem of the ego.
Right.
Which then answers the question that Shane was asking about the demagogue, and the demagogue who talks from the point of view of the collective will. Someone who is trapped in the authoritarianism of their base ego has no collective goodwill in mind, whatever language they use.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you very much.
No problem. No problem at all.
Just want to add here that it's not only a remedy to the problem of the authoritarianism or selfishness. It is also fundamentally resolve the problem of free will and fatalism, because the moment we realize that this is just artificial dividing between me and everything else, and the problem dissolves right at the moment.
It's why I think that this whole notion of theocracy, in one sense, is a sort of a blasphemy, because theocracy makes the false assumption that until it establishes itself, that the will of God is not being implemented. So, in essence, what it is projecting is a God that is weak until the moment that a political structure is erected in its name. But, our God is being that contains absolutely everything. It's always present, no matter what. So, and since it's always present, it doesn't require any political institutions to mediate for it or, to speak in its name. It is already always.
Sheikh, sorry to bother you, but just one more thing. Do you think that in the framework of the Abrahamic religions, like Christianity, Islam, which puts human in the center of the universe, it presupposes us to be, in some sense, egoistic, thinking that we are something more than the animals, we are something more than the plants, the trees, the nature around us, which in some sense, or at least to some degree, cause the exploitation, the gross exploitation we are making of our planet, and we are destroying it at the moment. Because we think, okay, it is ours, we are more than it, we can use it whatever ways we want.
But remember this, the Quran itself makes a distinction between bashar and insan. Now, in the English translations, this distinction usually gets lost. But insan is not destructive. The bashar is destructive, right? So therefore, the implication is, and this is what all the Sufis have drawn out repeatedly in their own writings, that the insan, by virtue of having traversed these stages and attained to this kind of noesis, right, now is that, you know, ahsan al-makhluq, by virtue of their realization, because they have attained what precisely the All-High has created them for. Whereas, you know, bashar, these humans or these beings in the body of humans, aren't there. And so they're destructive, competitive, authoritarian, you know, all the things that we know. And that is the distinction. That is the fundamental distinction, to know the difference between bashar and insan. And the Quran is very deliberate in making that distinction itself. Right? So, you know, in that particular verse, you know, God offers the vicegerency of the worlds to the heavens, to the mountains and the heavens, and they all deny it and run away in fear of it. But human takes it, and human is dumb. And it's using the word insan. But, you know, the way that Ibn Arabi explains that particular verse in several different ways throughout his writings is absolutely amazing. Because what this says is that this insania, once you have realized it, is a burden. Because, you know, and it doesn't necessarily make you materially better than anybody else. In fact, it probably disadvantages you on that material plane, as we read in the narrative of all the prophets and the saints. Because whenever they open their mouth, you know, the bashar loses his head and wants to kill him and persecute them and all that kind of stuff. But they take on that burden, and it's a crushing burden. But this crushing burden is a necessary burden. And herein, I think, is a kind of an Islamic esoteric answer to the mystery of suffering itself. You know, that this insan, this human, you know, this complete human, takes on something that no other creation can possibly take on, because they know that if they take it on, they will be crushed by the magnetic, you know, by the ignorance, the acosmic ignorance of the Bashariya. Okay, so this is, I think, where the distinction lies, because all of these other guys are exactly what you said they are. You know, they want to destroy this, you know, but that is why there is an insan and a bashar. And this insan is the ahsan al-makhluq. But how few are these? Very, very, very few.
Thank you very much, Sayyidi.
You're welcome. Sure.
It's also why you have an iblis.
Yeah. Yeah. And unfortunately, there's a lot of iblises in every age, not just one, but a whole multitude of them, you know. And that is why this, you know, egoic, you know, kind of, I think, you know, taking even politics from this kind of wayfaring, noetic perspective, I think can be very helpful to shed light on political theory itself. You know, I mean, these things are symbols, as long as you know, we're not taking it literally. But once we, you know, I think even begin to bring the symbolism into the political theory, I think we can start to even unravel some problems of political theory itself. Yeah. Anywho, if there are no further questions, we can leave it here for this week. And next week, we will obviously begin the third mashriq, which is the final section we're going to be reading of the Wisdom of the Throne. I think this will take us about 8 weeks, maybe less, to finish. And then we are done with the Wisdom of the Throne. But this was the kind of the heart of this book, these last 2 sections that we read, because he basically, resolves and basically puts down what he means by certain things that he's been talking about up to that point. And the rhetorics and the humor in it are hysterical. Every time I read that particular section of it where he's talking about the cannibalism, I just can't keep myself together. It's so funny. But anyway, let's leave it here for now until we meet up next week at the same time. Everybody be well. Y'all.